Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
This is Sean Martin. We're coming to you from RSA Conference 2023 in San Francisco. The buzz is upon us. The energy is back, and everything is risk this year, which is interesting. I've seen and heard a lot of focus on risk products and conversations, which is really cool. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that and some drivers, and look at it in the context of compliance and security and the value of security to consumers, perhaps, and how they view it. And I'm going to do that with a good friend of mine, Michael Parisi. How are you, Michael?
Good. How are you, Sean? Great to see you.
I know. It's been a while since we've been able to do one of these kind of sit-down chats. We've had many over the years.
We have, yes.
Lots of conversations on fun things. For the folks who don't know who you are, a little bit about you and your journey. Where are you now?
Sure. Well, I've been, over 20 years in the professional services space, and took a stint for about 5 years with a certification body called High Trust, and now I'm back in the professional services space, representing an organization by the name of Shellman, and focused on helping organizations manage their cybersecurity posture and providing assurances over their cybersecurity programs.
And for those who might not understand what assurance of the cybersecurity program is, tell us about that.
Yeah, so think about it as instilling stakeholder trust, right? So what our organization does is we come in and we provide independent validations over other organizations' information security, cybersecurity, and compliance programs, so they can use that to use with their stakeholders to ensure that they're doing everything that they're supposed to be doing.
Nice. So one of the things we wanted to talk about, and it's funny, I had a conversation earlier around the topic of GRC.
Yep.
And I made the joke that C was a driver, R is becoming more popular.
Yep.
But we forget the G still.
Yeah, that's for sure. Right? That's for sure.
And
yeah, we went backwards, right? We started from the back, and then
that's right. Yeah. But I think for me that kind of points to one of the things you wanted to talk about is the commoditization of compliance,
right?
And perhaps a trend that you're seeing that frightens you a bit. So talk to us a little bit about the trajectory of compliance in its current state and what you think it's going to lead to.
Sure. So maybe I'll start out with a phrase that one of my longtime mentors used to use, which is compliance is an outcome, security is a mission. And unfortunately, I feel as if, as a society, we're now at the point where compliance is, in fact, an outcome, because for many organizations, it has been commoditized. When you think about where compliance was 15, 20 years ago, and the true spirit and intent and the why compliance was there, that's not what it looks like today. So unfortunately, it's become a checkbox exercise for many organizations. My fear is that cybersecurity and security could lead in the same direction. To give you some examples, everyone's looking to leverage MSSPs today, right? Now, they have their place for sure within the marketplace. However, your mess for less is not necessarily the answer, right? And it's funny because I just had coffee with an MSSP where we were talking about your mess for less, and if you're looking to implement an appropriate stack, or if you're looking for guidance relative to the stack of solutions and tools that can help you from a cybersecurity perspective, by all means, those are the organizations that you want to work with. But very similar to moving to the cloud, if you think you're just going to outsource and get rid of the responsibility relative to cybersecurity, you're not. In addition to that, if you look at other examples that are happening within the marketplace, like cybersecurity underwriters, cybersecurity insurance underwriters, and insurers and carriers, they're treating it as a commodity as well. They're not really looking into what's the security posture within organizations. They're using information security questionnaires that are 100 questions long, that are self-attested to, that, let's face it, can be pencil whipped, right? So are they really treating security and cybersecurity programs and security posture at the level that they should be treating it, or is it quickly becoming commoditized? The other challenge, which you and I have talked about in the past, is the fog of more.
Yep.
I mean, there's so many. Look on the floor here at RSA. I mean, you can't even navigate your way through all these different security solutions. So if you think about CISOs and the role that you play and the knowledge that you have, how do you choose what's appropriate?
Yep.
So I fear that there's a race to the bottom relative to pricing as it relates to these solutions, and more importantly, relative to assurances. I've got so many examples, but I think we need to kind of reset and make sure that cybersecurity and security program posture does not lead in the direction of compliance, and really understand those partners that we're working with in order to help us improve our security posture and assurances and instill appropriate stakeholder trust.
So this would happen if the market pushes that direction.
Right.
And it's not any one entity
Correct.
controlling that direction. It's how everything is kind of mixing together. So as you pointed out, MSSPs are a necessary element of this ecosystem.
Right.
That there are organizations that can't staff, can't buy all the right tech,
Right.
don't have the understanding from a leadership perspective to,
Right.
even if they had the budget to do all that stuff correctly. And then there are some that just say, we can't take, now they still have the responsibility, but we can't own
Right.
this whole process either.
Right.
So there's a place for the MSSPs, but to your point on the pricing, or race to the bottom on pricing, what does that look like? Because I'm just picturing a handful of MSSPs kind of selecting a collection of certain technologies and everything else gets left behind. Or what does that look like? How does that market kind of shape into that place where you think commodity is an endpoint?
I think there's really three driving factors to it. So one is the stack, right? So what are they using? If we're talking about MSSPs specifically, what are they using relative to a tool set, right? And are those providers, for lack of a better term, bottom feeding, right, relative to the solutions that they're providing? So that's going to be a driver if there is a race to the bottom.
When you're talking platforms, I'm not interested in company names, but what platforms are you like?
Whether it's endpoint security, whether it's firewall management, right, patch management, et cetera. Yep. I mean, you name it, whatever you would see within a typical stack. Okay. I think the other driver is going to be, when we think about the term managed services, are they truly managed? Right. So the direction that I'm seeing a lot of MSSPs go is they're pushing more and more back on the customer and the entity relative to management. Think about the concept of shared responsibilities that we've seen in the cloud space for years. Right? When cloud started, it was, well, we could put everything in the cloud, and even the CSPs, they were sitting there saying, well, we can do all of this. But very quickly they learned, well, wait a minute, there's a dependency on the tenant, on the customer, relative to some of those controls and aspects of cybersecurity. So you've seen that come down as it relates to what they're willing to take on from a responsibility standpoint. The managed service providers have not yet identified that yet, right?
Are they morphing into guidance security service?
Well, so I think that's what differentiates a lot of them. Is, are they providing guidance and direction, or are they truly making management decisions? Because the organizations that you were speaking about before that really need MSSPs the most, they need somebody to make management decisions for them, right? They're not in a position to decide, out of these 10,000 security providers, who do I use? What am I supposed to be doing? So I think the morphing into guidance and direction, if that even exists, because for a lot of them that doesn't even exist anymore, that is also contributing to the race to the bottom, if you will. And then the third element is, lack of stakeholders questioning who their vendors are using for vendors, right? So if you think about from an MSSP perspective, if I am a stakeholder, don't I want to know who you are using as your MSSP? Stakeholders aren't asking those questions. They just want to know, do you have appropriate cybersecurity programs in place? The same thing holds true for organizations like ours that provide assurances over information security programs. Are you asking the question relative to who's providing those assurances? If you see an opinion on a SOC 2 report, for example, do you know the nature of that firm that provided that opinion? Probably not, right? So I think a big piece of this is also the responsibility of the stakeholder that is instilling trust within those vendors to be better educated and understand who are those vendors using as vendors.
And so, so many ways to go with this. I'm just, trust can be blind, or you can have informed trust.
Yes,
right?
I love that.
Which you can demonstrate certain things took place, or certain programs are in place, certain controls are in place, whatever it is. And you can also tell the story and tie it back to the business.
Right.
And I feel that starting to sound like a slam on MSSPs, and it's not.
No, not at all.
But I think if the company you're relying on to help you manage your security doesn't know your business,
yes,
then they need to be able to extract that information out, do their thing, and demonstrate back to you that they get it.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
And here's a plug for MSSPs. If they do that enough for a lot of companies like yours,
yes,
they then have the benefit of more knowledge
That's
from
right.
more systems and more things that potentially could help you.
That's right.
But if they can't demonstrate it, then that doesn't matter.
That's right. Exactly.
So talking to me about the demonstrability and the understanding of the business and how that plays into what you're viewing.
Yeah, so I think to your point that's critical, and that's really what adds value relative to these different service providers that are in the marketplace. And it goes back to where we started the conversation around commoditization and treating things as if it's a checkbox exercise. If you have a service provider that comes in and says, I'll take it over for you so you don't need to worry about it, that's one thing. As opposed to, I'm going to be a business partner because I understand your business, I understand your risks, back to where you started the conversation. And I know how to help you and advise you appropriately. That's what organizations should really be looking for. The demonstration, it's funny. Well, let's use vendor risk management as an example. I always like to use that one.
AKA third-party risk.
Exactly,
Yeah,
third-party risk management, right? So if you look at all the third-party risk management providers that exist within the marketplace today, won't name names, there's a lot of them. Right, whether it's security ratings organizations, whether it's those that claim to be managed services relative to third-party risk management. However, most of them are only platforms and tech. That's it. They're not providing you guidance relative to what's a methodology that I should be following from a third-party risk management perspective. Do I understand the inherent risk associated with this relationship? And the reason why, I think back to your point, is they try to be industry agnostic, but they don't necessarily understand what's occurring within that industry and within those organizations to advise them appropriately. So they think that tech and automation solves all the problems. Here's a platform to manage your third parties. However, a one-size-fits-all approach relative to tech, relative to MSSPs, whoever we're talking about, doesn't make sense because it doesn't take risk into the equation. So to your point, when we talk about governance, risk, and compliance, is that not a direction of taking risk management and potentially commoditizing it? And then what's next? Governance? Does governance become a commoditized activity, right? So where do you draw the line? My view is, again, compliance is an outcome. Security is a mission. And if you think about the aspects of governance and risk, if you don't make those missions, then we really run the risk of those becoming commoditized, and then we're all fooling ourselves at the end of the day.
So I'm thinking, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, but are the stakeholders the entity that can save us? And I ask that in hope that the answer is yes. But then I look at insurers as a stakeholder, and
right.
then the answer is probably not. But so who are the stakeholders, and do they have a role to kind of help us from this free fall?
Yeah, I love that. So I'll answer that as a yes with the following caveats. The stakeholders is the answer, right? I think that is the answer to solve for this issue. However, those stakeholders need to care. And a lot of the stakeholders that we're dealing with today don't care. So then that begs the question, why don't they care? Is it because they're treating it as commoditized activity? Or, and this is what I truly believe, I'm getting to the punchline, or is it because they're uneducated or they're ignorant, right? That's not to talk negative against any of our stakeholders.
Yeah, but unaware, there are other pressing things that,
right. Exactly.
that are top of mind,
Exactly.
rightfully so.
So let's take this conference as an example. How many CFOs are at this conference? I don't know, but I can guarantee you very few, right?
Yep.
How many board
I've
members?
not met any.
Right. How many board members are at this conference? How many business people are at this conference? So we've been so focused on the CISO and the information security community for so long. They get it. Those aren't the folks that need the education. And frankly, they're not necessarily the ones that are controlling the purse and the dollars that need to be spent in order to implement good cybersecurity programs. We need to educate boards, we need to educate businesses, and we need to educate business owners and other senior members within those businesses in order to have more stakeholders that have stake in the game. Yeah. So I believe it comes back to education.
Yeah. And one of the things we talked about is as a, I guess you can consider them a stakeholder, the customer.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. And before we started recording, you touched on consumers.
Yes.
Specifically as a customer, and that's
yes.
B2C, less B2B. And you said, would somebody buy from one retail chain versus another based on their maturity of their security program? And you said maybe, and I'm like, I don't know if I would. I don't care necessarily. Unless I'm deeper involved. If it's just to buy a product, that's one thing. But if I have a credit card from them, it becomes a little more entangled.
Right.
If I'm an investor in them, it becomes even more entangled.
Right.
But I guess for me, it doesn't matter until it hits me in the pocketbook.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
This is the point. So how do you see the customer? And it can be a consumer or B2B or B2G or whatever it is.
Yeah.
How do you see the customer playing a role in that?
It's a great question. I think with the passage of time and a number of the adverse events that we've seen, consumers have naturally become more aware of concepts of breaches. Somebody stole my data. Somebody stole my identity. Right? So my grandmother, God bless her soul, 97 years old, still alive. She knows what it means when there's a breach, right? She would have never known that years ago.
Right.
So I use her as an example because the average consumer at least understands the concept of risk. However, I don't think they're informed enough relative to the decisions that they can make as to what service providers, retailers, grocery stores, health insurance providers that they work with, banks, etc., because those institutions haven't necessarily put their foot forward to educate the consumers on how they're differentiating themselves relative to their competitors. So I think there's a huge opportunity in the marketplace for these different types of organizations to differentiate themselves as it relates to protecting personal information better than others.
And funny enough, we kind of circle back around to, well, that's compliance.
Right. Funny enough, right?
GDPR and CCPA, privacy. And I don't know. I'm just trying to think here on the fly, but I think the many conversations I've had this week we still tend to, and I bring it back to the joke, C drives everything.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
You might be mature and look at risk, but in the C drives everything, it's still all about privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's some SEC stuff, notification that talks about the breach and the impact and the risk,
Right.
and sharing that risk knowledge with others. But still, it's mostly privacy. And there's so much more to this game, right?
There is.
Intellectual property and integrity of data with misinformation. And I mean, we can spend an hour, 2 hours talking about that path. But how do we get out of we're deep into the commoditized compliance world?
Yeah.
And our eyes off the risk world and the
Right.
security world.
So I think part of the problem is the authoritative sources that we're dealing with when we think about the requirements, the legislation, whatever it may be. It's so generalized and it's not prescriptive. So as a result, and sometimes by design, right, it leads itself to interpretation. So as a result, you have a varying scale relative to how organizations are meeting compliance or these different standards. And if you have a choice, are you going to choose the high water mark or the low water mark? I mean, you're going to choose the low water mark if it helps you to meet the standard as it relates to compliance and the consumers know I'm HIPAA compliant or whatever it may be. So what's the incentive to reach the high water mark? And I believe if that becomes a differentiator from an organizational perspective, goes back to education, then there is an incentive to reach the high water mark. However, to your point, the average consumer doesn't understand the difference between privacy and security.
Right.
I mean, they just mash them together. They think it's the same thing.
And I'm HIPAA compliant.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times where that was misused for the wrong reasons in the wrong way.
Or I'm HIPAA certified.
Right.
Right.
Well, the certified. I'm thinking from a consumer perspective.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
I can't share with you that information.
Right.
It's my data.
Right, exactly. It's your data.
Yeah.
And more importantly, if an organization says, and I know we're talking about HIPAA, but take whatever you want, GDPR compliant, whatever, but we'll stay on the HIPAA track. If they say they're HIPAA compliant, what are you doing as a consumer to validate that and verify that? I can't tell you how many organizations we came across in my old role that would say they were, quote unquote, certified in something when they weren't. Right? I mean, that happens every day. I mean, let's not get into the FTX conversation, but we could see a number of things that have happened. So as consumers, I think we really need to dig our heels in and start asking those questions and make sure we have appropriate assurances relative to these organizations protecting our information. And that should be a factor into our decision as it relates to who we work with.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into the conversation we had yesterday.
Right.
But I want to go to this point that's still in my mind.
Yeah.
Of why are we doing this in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about HIPAA, yes, it's to protect the private information of that person.
Right.
So that PHI we're trying to secure and protect from misuse, misaccess and misuse. Ultimately, though, it's about ensuring that data is accessed and available and it has integrity for the people who need it.
That's right.
To provide the care for that patient.
That's right.
So you change the players, change the story, but there's always something way more than the data and the control. Absolutely. So,
I mean, I love the concept of integrity, to your point, because I think as a lot of consumers we're focused on, well, is our data safe? And I go back to stolen identities and stolen credit cards. Come on, who hasn't had a credit card stolen in today's day and age, right? I mean, that happens so many times. But when you think about, why, to your point, data needs to be protected and we need to have assurances over protecting personal information more broadly, but we'll zoom into healthcare for a second. The integrity of that data is critical to ensure the appropriate care is delivered. Yes, of course, we don't want our data stolen because we don't want somebody to know about a potential healthcare condition that I have. So then I'm going to be marketed to, oh, it looks like you're a diabetic, come buy this product, etc., whatever it may be. Or, potential terror threats. Like, I get that. But at the end of the day, the integrity of that data is critical. So certain functions can happen completely and accurately, whether that's care delivery, whether it's on the financial services side of the house. And I think a lot of consumers lose sight of that.
Yep. Well, and for me, I may be a little foggy or cobwebby in my head, but there's HIPAA and high tech, right? And together, they say protect,
correct,
and ensure, enable.
Correct. Ensure and enable. That's right. Exactly.
Enabled service.
Well, look at interoperability, right? That's what they're trying to do with TEFCA and everything in the interoperability space. And you and I have talked about that in the past. It's all about ensuring the integrity of that data so that care can be delivered universally across our care delivery network.
Yep. I feel we could spend hours. I just got the nod from the crew here at RSA saying we've hit our mark. So
time to go.
We can spend hours on this, I think, but I'm gonna leave it there. We're gonna let people ruminate on this, I think, a bit. What does that race to the bottom look like?
That's right.
And what's their role? Maybe some people may want the race to the bottom.
They may.
But what's the role and what's their role? And what can they do in that role to ensure that society doesn't get negatively impacted here?
That's right. Let's be better informed consumers, and let's be better stakeholders in the equation.
Yep. And in true RSA conference theme, stronger together.
That's right.
Nice one. Well, Michael, it's been great as always. Super insightful and engaging chat. And for those listening, we'll put links to your profile, and they can connect with you and have their own conversation.
Sounds great.
About the race to the bottom or the climb and ascent to the top.
That's right.
Maybe it's a better path.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Sean.
If you enjoyed this podcast, share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thank you for listening.